Um, oh gosh. Um, uh, Dave, thanks for inviting me. I've gotten to know Dave in my poetry workshop this spring, and I have to say he was one of the high points of my spring, which was super, super busy. And it's still going on, but it's winding down now. And so thank you for Dave, for your generosity and kindness in my workshop this spring. I I'm reading from my new book, Holoholo, which I'm holding up here, and it is the Holoholo is the Hawaiian word for walking out with no destination in mind. And when I decided to call the book this, I had no idea going Holoholo would be something so supernatural and filled with longing when the book was published. Other languages have words for this movement. In French, there's the flaneur, a man who walks aimlessly around a city, probably Paris. A new book has been written about by a flâneuse, a woman who walks around cities. And in Italian, there's the passeggiata, the aimless walk that people take after dinner. Um, I grew up in Hawaii, so I'll stick with Holoholo for my aimless walking around my consciousness in the world. This book is all odes, which is an ancient poem of praise. I think I was writing odes before I even knew that I was, but in my second book, that's when my first poems were called odes. And this is an ancient poem. The first odes were written in ancient Sumeria, and then 1,000 years later, the Hebrew poets began to write their psalms praising their God. And they've just been written throughout the history of the world and are being written today. I um, I don't know what attracts me so much to praise, but I think that it's a starting place. And even from the very first odes, praise is a very complicated thing. It is praising either a god or a king or some like a nightingale or as in Neruda's, the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda's odes, his socks. And yet there's also a contemplation of the end of life in all of these odes. And so I think that it's really an investigation of consciousness and our place in the world. And I think we're all on a spiritual journey as well as a physical one as we move through our time on Earth. Um, I'd like to concentrate on my journey, which I express in some of the poems in this book, which started in the Baptist church of my parents, which was not a particularly joyful beginning, but it did have its high points, one being the King James Bible with its gorgeous language. One of my early poems was built around John 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Pretty heady stuff for a writer. Then I spent some time studying world religions, Hindu, Vedanta, Taoism, and eventually spending a month in a Buddhist meditation retreat, which allowed me to declutter my mind in a most Danish modern fashion. I'm afraid my poetry is very much built on muchness, though. One friend said, "You want to say more by saying more," and that's I think my poetic orientation. I'd like to begin with a kind of spiritual statement that came in part from the 2016 election, which was more difficult than the pandemic for me. Dave and I were talking about this last week. The pandemic for me was like a writer's workshop. I said, yay, I have time to get all of the writing done that I want to get done. And I wasn't able to do that, but at the same time, I got a good start on a lot of different kinds of projects. The 2016 election was a super bummer for me, and I had a really hard time coming to grips with it. And one day I was getting ready to go out and, just as you do, check yourself in the mirror to see that, you don't look too bad. And I realized that not only was my sweater on backwards, but it was inside out. So this poem came from that ode on being backwards and inside out and in a wreck with myself. Before I leave the house, I'm checking myself in the mirror, and I see that not only is my sweater backwards, but it's also inside out, which is how it's going these days. What with the election and the world all topsy-turvy, and I'm in a parking lot of the organic market, memorizing my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun, and the line, if hair be wires, is giving me a hard time, so I forget to pull my handbrake. And when I'm choosing apples, the intercom blares. There's a rogue white Toyota rolling in the parking lot, and I run out, and two men have stopped my car with a tire jack, one being L'Ingenue Parsons, a local jazz icon. And for the first time in years, I think of my college boyfriend's wreck with himself, waking up one morning to two cops pointing across the street and asking him if one of the cars was his, and him answering, "They're both mine." The baby blue Morris Minor called Marcia Minor, and the Peugeot station wagon, which had rolled into the passenger door of Marcia. And I think about how I'm often in a wreck with myself, the dress of reason being played by the fire of everyday insanity. And there I stand, naked and singed, wondering how I'm going to make it to the next morning. But I wake up and there's my darling in bed next to me, and Patsy meowing at the door, and the nervous birds singing, and there's coffee to brew before I follow the white rabbit down his hole, because I'm late for a very important date, though my sweater is backwards and inside out, and I'm in a wreck with myself, a collision of molecules. The eyes and ears and nose send to Queen Brain, who is in charge of nothing in her turret of gray cells, monkey drinks, and doubt. So this is something I think about a lot, Queen Brain, who is in charge of nothing, because, you know, we like to think that we're in charge of our lives, and then we see that not so much. And so I think about this a lot, and I think about my mind and my consciousness and how it works. The mind, is it our friend or is it our frenemy? This is the question of the 21st century. Sometimes it's a true friend, and then sometimes it's just, it seems like it's bent on destroying you. One of the things I love to do in my poetry is to leap from image to image in my giving a sense of how the mind jumps from thought to thought. This next poem begins with an article my sister gave me, then jumps to travel, and then to time travel, and which is really one of my obsessions. I would just love to travel in time, and I fantasize about this all the time. And I have my own copy of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and 12 Monkeys. I love time travel movies. The cheesier, the better. But one of the things I really want to witness is a dinner that was hosted by Robert Hayden, who is a kind of minor painter in the Romantic period, but he had this dinner party to unveil a painting he was doing about Jesus's entrance into Jerusalem. And in it was a portrait of Keats and Wordsworth and Charles Lamb, the essayist. And so I just love to think about this dinner that Hayden called in his diaries the immortal dinner. And then in this poem, I jump back to my sister again, and then to an article at the end I read about Solzhenitsyn, who is, I would say, not one of my favorite Russian writers, but I've read a lot of his work and I really, really like it a lot. Especially his beautiful little, it's really a novella, A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which was published early in the 60s. So this is called Ode on My Prison. This morning, I read about a couple arrested for selling hundreds of tickets to heaven, which they said were made from pure gold, and all you have to do is hand yours over to St. Peter and you're ushered into paradise. Tito Watts, the mastermind of this scheme, told the police Jesus gave him the tickets in the parking lot behind the KFC and told him to sell them so he could pay Stevie, an alien Tito met at a bar, to take him to a planet made of drugs. You should arrest Jesus, said Tito. I'll wear a wire and set him up. His wife agreed they both wanted to leave Earth, and I know how she feels because most newspaper stories are such a bummer. Sexcapades, lying, the Russians. So, Jesus, where's my golden ticket? Not that I'm all that keen to go to heaven, but I would like to go to Vietnam and Cambodia, though I guess a travel agent could set that up for me. And I'm always fantasizing about dropping in on Haydn's Immortal Dinner and eavesdropping on Keats and Wordsworth, or spending a fortnight in London in 1601, seeing Shakespeare as Hamlet's father's ghost, taking in the general squalor and maybe picking up some manuscripts from the printing house floor, tucking them in my farthingale, and then taking off to Chawton College to stalk Jane Austen for a while. Though in that dress, it's going to be hard to go incognito, so maybe I should wear black jeans. And you may be forgiven for thinking that I've touched down on that planet of drugs, but who needs them? Really, when your mind can spin out its own delirium, a dream here, a phantasmagoria there. And right now I'm fixated on Jesus, wired to bust Jesus. And doesn't it seem sometimes as if we're all hanging around the KFC, waiting for something supernatural to appear? Not Jesus, but maybe Walt Whitman walking to New Orleans with his brothers, a cloud of words crowding out Stevie and the other aliens as Walt fuels his own dream of America, where we're looking after each other instead of grubbing for all the moolah we can stuff up our backsides. Though a friend of my sister's says that Earth is an alien penal colony, and we're all doing time for crimes against the universe. So I guess Stevie's a rogue guard at the Florida penitentiary. And sometimes my body does seem like a prison of sprains and back pain, my mind like the trenches at Verdun, the mud, the mustard gas. And yet, when the war is over, I'm still alive, seem to have all my limbs. Every cup of tea is ambrosia. And if that's not enough, it's May. Jasmine and roses are blooming, my heart clambering over the clouds as if on wings. And I can't help but think of Solzhenitsyn looking back on his years in the gulag and saying, "Bless you, my prison, for having been in my life." I love that quote from Solzhenitsyn. I hope I can get to a point where I can say that myself. It's such a generous and beautiful thing to be able to say. Um, the One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is that is how I got to be the way where I am today. It's like really it's sometimes kind of fascinating. I think everybody does that. You know, you think you start out as a kid playing baseball or playing with dolls, and then you end up the rector of St. John's, or you know what I do for a living, which is talk about poetry. How did that happen? I'm going to read this poem from the second section of Holoholo, which is called Ontological Odes. And that's just a fancy way of saying odes that are trying to figure out what we're doing here on Earth. Because I'm a woman, my focus tends to be on that category of being. And one of the things I find mystifying is how I ended up where I am. I didn't have a career plan. No one whose two favorite subjects are in school are poetry and Renaissance art history could be said to be planning for the future. And yet here I am immersed in poetry. And because of my university study abroad program in Florence, I've seen a lot of gorgeous Renaissance paintings. In this poem, I'm trying to figure out how it happened. And it's called Ode to My Younger Self. You were so beautiful and stupid, though you thought you were so smart. And in a way, you were because you love poetry and Beethoven and apples. But why did it take you so long to learn to drink coffee and to eat breakfast? And those boyfriends. Oh, well, you were young and experimenting with everything. Love dancing at lesbian bars, meditating for a month at a Buddhist retreat, taking a train from Kansas City to New York, and staying with a friend whose Buddhist master told her you had bad vibes and not to stay in the same apartment with you. The same guy who gave her a special stone to put her in her vagina to cure the bad vibes there. Though she wasn't the weirdest friend you had, because that would have to be Marianne, who, when I see her around town now and she's skinny, I know she's not taking her meds. And that tiger stalk of hers will end up badly for me in the jungle of her mind. So I try not to make eye contact because more than anything, I don't want to put on my combat boots and wade into her psychodrama. And when I see young women walking down the street with that lost look in their eyes, I want to say to them, don't despair, beautiful young women. You'll find yourself. And one day you wake up and realize you were always that person. But maybe I'm wrong, because some women marry a guy who looks like a prince and end up in a morgue or refuge house, or hanging themselves from the chandelier in their rented rooms. Time can be dangerous. So read Middlemarch, young women, because George Eliot can do your thinking for you until you get your own mind organized, or Dostoevsky and Charlotte Bronte, who helped me navigate the utter stupidity of my early 20s, and Keats and Garcia Lorca. So, in a sense, my younger self, you chose your friends well, though they were all in books. And Thomas Hardy was one of your best boyfriends ever, wasn't he? Because you spotted your Gabriel Oak from across the room and were not pulled in by Sergeant Frank Troy. And Jane Austen, she taught you how to hold out for what you really wanted. And Virginia Woolf, she showed you how to be a woman and a man in the same body through time. And the Song of Solomon told you that love could be poetry. So thank you for staying up all night and reading and not going out to bars. And I really appreciate that dance class you took 3 days a week, all through your 30s. And after that, the yoga. I'm feeling fit right now, and I know I have you to thank. And those 11 years as a vegetarian, you really took care of my heart. Another aspect of being that is especially hard is the one of loss of loved ones that comes along the way. And the older you get, the more that loss occurs to you. I've lost both of my parents, and this is a poem about losing uh, a really beloved brother who's still alive, but and we were close at one time, but we're just not close anymore. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but this is a poem where the great Ted Solitaroff one time said that art is the way to organize and partially understand your experience. So I really feel like this poem is me organizing and maybe partially understanding my experience. It's called Ode on Anger, the Dalai Lama, and Eliot's Red Boots. I get this story secondhand since I'm not speaking to my brother, who can be charming until he isn't, which always happens. And his main beef against me seems to be that I'm older, which I can't see any way of changing except by sorcery or a rift in the time-space continuum. But my sister calls me with a report every time he checks in. And the latest is that he finds a photo of the Dalai Lama as a boy, which he places by his bed. Only he doesn't know that it's the Dalai Lama who comes to him in a dream and tells my brother that he has to let go of his anger, to which he replies, I don't want to. I love my anger. And the Dalai Lama says it's not doing you or anyone else any good. And when my brother wakes up, he calls my sister and tells her he's had this epiphany, though we've been telling him the same thing for years. But I suppose a universal spiritual leader carries more weight than your stupid sisters who are always trying to boss you around and made good grades and went to college, la-ti-da. But I think about my brother's son when he was 4, a beautiful boy who I loved to babysit. And we were going somewhere one day, and I told him, honey, put on your shoes. And my father had given him some red cowboy boots, which he loved. So I left him putting them on. And when I returned, he had them on the wrong feet. And I said, darling, you have them on the wrong feet. And he replied, I like them that way. But in a few minutes, he hobbled to another room and came back with the boots on the right feet, and we said nothing more about them. And I guess that's what I wish would happen with my brother's anger, though he might have to go to Mars and come back to offload that particular cargo, because aren't we more like pack mules than gods most days, picking our way across the desert and or up the mountain path with avalanches, and the heaviest loads are our grudges and fears, while poetry and beauty rest on our shoulders like fairy wings, or one of those pastries in a shop window in Paris, almost too beautiful to eat, but eat it we do, with its frosting of butter and sugar and eggs. Now all my Post-its are taking over. One of the things I really, really love about language is studying foreign languages and finding words that can't readily be translated into English, or we need at least a sentence to get it right. Everybody knows about Schadenfreude from the German, which is happiness in somebody else's misery. One of my favorite German words is Scheißbedauerung. Scheiß is number 2. And Bedauerung, it means regrets. So it's regret that things are not as bad as you hope they would be, which is like so fabulous. I can't even begin to just, to think about it. Another favorite word is the Swedish word mangata, which is the trail moonlight makes on water. And I think that that's probably one of the most poetic words that I can come up with. But one of my favorites is the Russian word razblyuto, which is the feeling you have for someone you once loved, but love no more. And we've all experienced this, because even when you think of somebody who's done you wrong, there's a depth of feeling there that's not the same as it was when you were in the thrall to that person, but still it's a beautiful thought and a beautiful emotion. And the Russians are really, really good at coming up with these words. I think it might be because they have those long, long winters to think about deep emotional things like this. So this poem is Ode to Yiddish, Gratitude and the Feeling You Have for Someone You Once Loved, but love no more. A student says that 2 people are schmoozing in a poem, but I think he means something a little more intimate than a chat. So I say, Tom, are they having sex? And when he nods his head with an enthusiastic yes, I tell him that the Yiddish word he wants is shtup. And I say to myself, oy mir, because I know a little Yiddish picked up from a boyfriend I lived with for 4 years in my 20s, which then I found I was a shiksa and a member of the Goyim, something that hadn't come up in the Baptist church in which I was raised. Although Jews were always referred to as God's chosen people, and during the apocalypse, when Jesus returns to earth, only they will be able to say, oh yeah, right, I believe. while all the other sinful people are being annihilated by fiery comets and tornadoes. Because if you are a Buddhist or a Hindu, or even worse, someone who knew about Jesus, but who was too busy drinking and whoring to be bothered, you will be fresh out of luck. And I would refer to myself as the shiksa, which I kind of liked since I'd come from Hawaii, where I had been a haole girl, and it became part of my shtick. And even though it didn't work out between us, I was a little too softic for his taste, which tended toward the boy chick, not a little boy, but a chick who looked like a boy, which was never going to happen for me, no matter how much I starved myself. But I'm grateful to my former boyfriend for the Yiddish that I pepper my conversation with. And and sometimes I get all verklempt and schmaltzy about those years we spent in our vegetarian squalor, reading books and fighting about all the sports he watched on TV, which reached its apotheosis one Sunday when he began football game number 4, and I threw the television across the room. And then he threw my typewriter across the room. And there we were, 2 broken appliances and no ideas for dinner, everything forgot. And I thought he was a schmendrick and he hated all my tchotchkes, and I couldn't stand his constant kvetching, and he hated how big my tuchus was. And why are there so many words for penis in Yiddish? Schmuck, putz, schlemiel come right to mind. And losers, there are a lot of them too. Nebish, nudge, nudnik. That's a lot of losing to schlep around with you, not to mention to smear on the bagel of your day. But now that he's an altercocker and I'm a booby, sometimes a time has erased so many of my grievances. So I say, Shalom, old friend, time is a gonuf. But sometimes he steals the dreck we never needed anyway. That's one of the great things about, I think, getting older is just gaining a little perspective on the things that have happened to you in your life. I'd like to end my reading with a poem that's really about my mother. In 2015, my husband and I went to Cuba, it was a part of a cultural tour. So one of the things that we had on our itinerary was to visit a nursing home. And I have to admit, it wasn't my favorite, I wasn't looking forward to it. I didn't know what was going to happen. And but it turned out to be one of my favorite things about the whole tour. Cuba is a beautiful country. If you ever get a chance to go, I would really recommend it. There were about 3 years where it was possible to really do it the way we did it, but I think it might happen again. So it's just green and technicolor in so many different ways, and the people are so beautiful. This is it kind of roams around a little bit in our Cuban adventure. But at the end, I go to Hawaii, and my mother is buried in a beautiful extinct volcano called Punch Bowl in Honolulu. And so that's where the poem is ending up. And this is called Ode on Killing Sadness. In the nursing home in Havana, I can't help but think of my mother, who would be 91, as I take each old woman's hand and say, hola, or buenas tardes. And I notice one lady who's sitting off by the side with a look that says, no one's going to say hello to me. So I walk over and take her hand, and she sits up and kisses me on the cheek, a hard peck, just like the kamikaze kisses of my mother. And through my tears, I hear her say, you're weak like your daddy. And I am weak because I still miss her so much after 5 years. And I kiss the Cuban woman's cheek, and I want to take her home with me. But we don't even speak the same language, which you could have said about my own mother and myself. And all these women in Havana have raised better daughters than I was. And I feel like the creatures in Roberto Fabilo's drawings, a woman with wings, yes, but with the head of a bird. And a couple of nights before, we saw the Buena Vista Social Club, and the MC said at the start of the evening, here we are, killing sadness. And the music did take the sting out of the night. And I'm thinking of this when we go to the cemetery and see the tomb of Amelia Gori, who died in childbirth and was buried with her son between her legs, whose husband came every day with flowers, and 2 years later, when his own father died and the tomb was opened, begged to have his wife's coffin unsealed so he could see his beloved again. And when they pulled back the lid, the child was in his mother's arms. A miracle? Who knows? But hundreds of plaques surround the tomb in gratitude for miraculous births, restored eyesight, banished cancers. And the man who takes care of the site says he has seen men step out of wheelchairs and women throw away crutches. And on top of the tomb, a marble woman is holding a child, and a living woman with bright red hair shuffles up to the statue, touches the baby's bottom, and backs away from the tomb, praying for her own miracle. And I say a prayer for my mother, whose hard kisses were so sweet, and ask her to let me tell her story as I know it. And when I stand near her grave 3 months later on an island in the Pacific, I will thank her again for the hard kiss she sent special delivery through the little grandma in the rest home in Havana, Cuba, another island in the middle of an enormous sea. Thank you very much for coming to this reading. And I think that Dave and I are going to chat now, aren't we?
That would be a lot of fun, Barbara. Thank you for an amazing reading. And Barbara, I don't think I've shared this with you, but one of my claims to fame is that my parents and I stalked Alexander Solzhenitsyn in Vermont. We went to his little house in the middle of nowhere in Vermont, and kind of were stalking outside until my parents finally said, we probably need to get going. He's going to call the police on us. But they just wanted to see where Solzhenitsyn had been exiled to. So that is a memory from childhood, and I love that quote that you had in that poem. Barbara, I think I'm sure folks in the reading have some questions, but to give you a little time to be thinking, I'd love to just get started by asking you. I think everyone has been struck at the reading tonight just by the kind of how you bring together what at first glance might be kind of these disparate worlds, and you stitch it all together. Can you just tell us how did these poems come together for you? Tell us about how do you create these poems? I think folks just want to know, like, how does something so beautiful like that happen? Guide us through your writing process.
Well, before the reading started, we were talking, and I didn't have much of a chance to write this semester because I was so busy. But one of the things I always do is take notes when something, just I'm reading something, or I'm, just walking around the world, or something comes up, I'll just make a little note, and I have it's called notes over here at the side of my computer. And so I just type it down real fast. And I always have to make and sometimes I'll, if I have pen or paper, I'll write it down too, because as my mother used to say, sure as shooting, if I let a second pass, it'll go out of my mind. So and I don't remember anything anymore. So I had all of these notes, and yesterday it was so wonderful. I got to kind of put them all together, and I realized that even though I hadn't been writing, I'd been getting ready to write. And I think it's a two-part process. I talked a little bit about trying to replicate consciousness. Nobody wants to go through the chaos of anybody else's mind. I mean, it's you have to artify it in a certain, but you want to give that sense of the of jumping from one thing to another. I know we've all had this experience where you'll be thinking about what you're going to make for dinner, and then you end up on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and you think, how did that happen? And then you go back through the process and you see how you got there. And that's something that I think about a lot, that, our minds are in motion all the time. We're jumping from one thing to another, but that's our consciousness. That's the way we see the world. And so I really try to give that poetic expression. And there are a lot of the great Spanish poet, Federico Garcia Lorca called it leaping. You leap from one thing to another, from the American, or he talked about wild association. You associate wildly in your poems, and and the wilder you are, the more chances you take. Well, the closer you come to failure, because sometimes it just doesn't work out. But I think that I have a two-part process. One is collecting all of these different um, prompts, from my own life, and then writing them down, and then just seeing where certain things maybe have something in common, and putting them together. But so that's kind of the conscious, rational part of my mind working. But I think all writing happens in the moment. And what I love is to sit down and just start riffing on those notes and seeing where they take me. Sometimes I'll hit a wall and nothing will happen, or I'll start a poem, and it, I stop after about 10 lines. I think you've probably heard me read my Ode to Parties, Words for Parties, too many times, Dave. It's in this book. And I wrote about 10 lines and I stopped. And then when I picked it up, I was trying to do end rhymes and it just wasn't working. And then I picked it up again and it became a free verse poem, and it almost wrote itself. It was really exciting. And I kept surprising myself over and over again. And that's what I love, is when I'm writing and the conscious notes I've taken, when I start working with them, they take me to places I never would have planned. And it happens in the moment. So that's and I really try not to have my conscious mind or of course I'm conscious when I'm writing, but my rational mind interfere in that process, because I think that if you can surprise yourself, you can surprise your reader too. And that's a thrill.
I love how you use the word notes, the musicality. Laurel comments in the chat, the way you weave together the images and illusions evokes powerful emotions, just like music does, right, Laurel? I agree with you, the musicality of Barbara's work. Other questions, thoughts that you have, friends? I'd love to hear your questions for Barbara. Dennis.
I'm not familiar with your work, but I'd really like to read your poetry and look forward to doing that. Your story about Havana and Cuba struck me, especially in the sense that your moment in the senior home, and the time that you noticed one person who looked like they didn't think they were going to be taken care of, and you took the time to take care of them. And that kind of attention to an individual resonates now in your poem. And I wonder if you even would have written the poem if you hadn't had that particular interchange. If little accidents like that have an effect, I don't know, one way or the other. But
Oh, I think you're absolutely right, Dennis. I wouldn't have written the poem if that hadn't happened. It was like a gift from, the universe to me. I mean, it was, and right away I knew something would happen with it. I mean, but yeah, those moments are really, really super moving. And also too, the that MC saying, "Here we are, killing sadness." I just loved that. I just loved it. And I had my notebook with me, and I wrote it down because we were drinking mojitos. And you know what happens when you drink mojitos? You forget things like that.
especially in Cuba.
Uh-huh, yeah.
Barbara, that's beautiful. And St. John's has had a, Dennis, is it 20 years now?
20 years, yes.
20 years, a companion relationship with a small church in a very small town called Zaria, Cuba. And so the people of St. John's through the years, including our young people, have really gotten to know the people of that community through the years. And Dennis is one of our key leaders. So Dennis has been to Cuba several times, among others of you. Laurel notes, do the conscious notes drive the shaping of the poem, or do the emotions come first, Barbara?
It's so hard to divorce them from each other. I'm just looking, I'm trying to think, I'm looking at my notes for these new poems that I have. Let me see if I can bring this up. Oh, it's just, they, like one of the ones, one of the notes for one of the poems is that I have a dream. I have a house that I really love, but and but I have this recurring dream where for some reason or other, and often I don't know why, I've sold the house and moved to some other place another house that's just not as nice as the house that I live in now. And the whole dream is just trying to get back to the house that I'm in now, but somebody else lives there, or it's been sold, or it's disappeared, or I'm in a different country. I mean, there are lots of different scenarios. And so I'm starting with that image, but I have no idea where it's going to take me. So I think that you start with an image and then, but obviously, Laurel, there's an emotion there that's already reverberating in the poem, that of loss, regret, making wrong decisions, leaving something that you love for ephemeral better thing that doesn't pan out, and wanting to get back to the garden or Eden. I don't know, I can just feel the emotion already starting to drive the poem. So I think it's both of those, both emotion and the image. So you start with an image and then move on to, but the emotion carries you, or I think that's the case. And emotions are different. Sometimes it's an ebullient emotion, and sometimes it's a little bit a sadder one. Or emotions there's quite a range, isn't there? So it can be a different kind of emotion that would be driving a certain kind of poem. Anyway, that's a really good question. I'm going to be thinking about that for a while.
On that topic, Barbara, my St. John's friends probably think I'm a broken record, but what do you ever? I mean, there's a lot of kind of in this response right here. The Ignatian daily exam, Saint Ignatius of Loyola. You mentioned the Spanish a couple of times, and his spiritual exercises, particularly his daily exam, it kind of ask at the end of the day the Christian to go back and look at the where you encountered God, kind of in a joyful part. So I could see some of that in writing poetry, but also the where you where you kind of had the worst moment of the day. Where was God in that? And so I was in the parking lot with you. I was like, and so I feel like in Saint Ignatius would want you to dive into the emotions and also to dive into kind of the images, part of that kind of exercise in his spirituality. So I definitely heard a lot of that as you were in your conversation, particularly with the notes. I mean, that's exactly what he would want you to do. So thank you thank you for
Yeah,
that.
and also too, I think it's important to be grateful for the negative things that happen too, because sometimes those are the best teachers, aren't they? You learn more. I think that's what Ode to My Prison is all about. Is just some of the. I mean, I can't believe that at the end, Solzhenitsyn saying, "Thank you, my prison, for being in my life." That's. And in a sense, he would not have been the writer he was if he hadn't gone to the gulag. And I mean, his first his first books were about being in the Soviet prison camps. And for somebody to say that to me was like just incredibly beautiful.
Other questions for Barbara? We have time for maybe one or two more. Lee, please, your colleague.
Barbara, so one thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I always love talking to you about, sort of mixing in different kinds of sort of drawing on painting and drawing and sort of visual culture. And I know over in the Lit Crit line, when we're trying to write, critical books, sometimes it feels like we're almost throwing as many words as we can at sort of visual culture or music to try to approximate it, because it's in a different medium and we're just approximating it by throwing as many words as we can at it. And so I'm always interested in talking to people about how they think about writing when it's trying to think about, paintings or visual culture or films or even music, and sort of what that process is like for you.
Well, there's a whole subset of poetry called ekphrastic poetry, which is writing about art and I have done some of that. I know that one of the things my husband and I, when we started getting Social Security, were able to go to Italy for a month at the at the end of our school year just to close the door on it, and that hasn't happened for the last 2 years. But one of the things I like to do is I took a sketching class, and I'm not a good drawer by any stretch of the imagination, but I really enjoy it. And my little project in Florence is to go and draw Donatello's David. And I've written several poems about it, describing the Donatello's David, and also to the reaction of people in the room. It's one of those sculptures that is still driving people crazy after 500 years. And I keep thinking that Donatello would just absolutely be thrilled to death to know that he was still shaking people up all this time later. But I don't, I'm not answering your question, am I? I mean, I guess I throw a lot of words at artistic works, but it's not the same way that you throw words, because you're trying to describe it, whereas I'm just trying to just to make my world flesh. Does that make can't that the King James Bible is just with me always. So does that, I feel like I just talked around your question and didn't really answer it. Lee, come back at me. What do you think?
I really like that. And I also, sometimes I think about some of the artists who have synesthesia, whose senses cross, like Kanye West. Actually, if he's listening to music, he sees the colors of the notes. And I'm really interested in that kind of juxtaposing different kinds of perception and different kinds of art or artistic ways of seeing the world or cultural expression, because I think there's something really interesting about the juxtaposition. You can learn new things. So
yeah, and also too, sometimes, now I didn't read any of these poems tonight because I don't think they really go over as well in readings as some other kinds of, as the more narratives, story-oriented poems. But sometimes I really like to I call them bebop poems, where it's like they're driven by the language rather than and of course they're driven by this, sense as well, but the language is what's really working in it. And I really love jazz, and learned a lot from listening to artists like John. I love Lester Young's sax, and John Coltrane, and Ornette Coleman too, who whose work isn't beautiful on the surface, but it goes really deep. And so that kind of juxtaposition of sounds and poems really attracts me as well. So I sometimes try to do that and replicate music in my poems. It's a lot harder to pull off than a more narrative poem. So I don't do it as often as I used to when I was younger and more hardworking.
I can vouch that she's still very, very hardworking. And Barbara, we are so grateful for your time with us this evening. It's just been really powerful, and we're grateful for you. And of course, you can say no to this, but I'm wondering, because we're all coming out of our shells and getting ready to go back to social situations. Perhaps it's a congregation in the church, or maybe just a party in the local neighborhood. Is there any chance you might end tonight with ode to the parties that you mentioned earlier? Or is it too long?
No.
I love it so much, but you can say no.
No, I'll read it. I just it's a poem that where is it? I thought it was in the oh yeah, here it is. It's and you can I've told you that I started out about I didn't even get that far. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got about 5 lines into it, and then I just stopped, and then it took being in Italy to finish this poem, and really just to being able to shut out the outside world. Ode on Words for Parties, American edition. Why do we have so many words for parties? A slew of them once you start looking: shindig, bash, meet and greets, raves, blowouts, barbecues, and more tepid functions, receptions, luncheons, and dues of all kinds. Though let's face it, most people don't have a clue about how to throw a party. Like the friend who was complaining because her husband wanted to have lots of food at the brunch they were planning, but she knew that people didn't go to parties to eat. And Marcia and I had to break it to her that brunch was the combination of 2 meals. So her guests were expecting to eat double. And you can't believe the shock on her face. But her husband put out a great spread, and everyone ate and talked. Though we've always been to those parties with the bowl of dead chips and the onion dip that looks like cat vomit on the driveway. Actually, not that good. But my sister throws a fabulous party because she's a great cook and has an army of wine bottles that never stops marching, and her garden is verdant, and she has a pool, which some people end up in at the end of the night. What would be the word for that kind of party? Vino pool party? And the other one might be a kitty dip party. And guest, they can run a party too. Think of the music Nazis who make their way through the world with their one-upmanship. And your collection of Van Morrison and Jimi Hendrix is so uncool compared to the Mud Stumps and Echo Park, but only before they caved and became famous and were no longer cool. Then there are the couples who are glued by the hip, like twins conjoined by church and state, or the bloviators, or the drunks who can turn a party into a Godzilla Stomps Tokyo apocalypse. Like the time the guy with the Ponderosa belt buckle slid chest first in a dance move and put a gouge 3 feet long on my hardwood floor. And I hadn't even invited him. He was my hairdresser's friend. That party was over. I wanted everyone out of my house. Or what about the people who live in the middle of nowhere, and you know that on the way home you'll end up in Hades or a ditch? If you're lucky, what would you call those? Suburban hell parties? Hansel and Gretel lost weekend parties. I often try to talk my husband into pulling over so we don't crash, but he reminds me that we're just setting ourselves up for the serial killers who roam lonesome highways looking for poets. And what would you call that concatenation of events? Zodiac after party stab fest? Post bash head bash? You can see when I'm not going to parties, I'm watching way too many true crime shows which make you mistrust your fellow human beings in the most basic way. And yet we continue to throw parties, which is an interesting choice of verbs. And English is full of them. Throw a party, pitch a fit, pitch a tent, pitch a no-hitter, pitch in, pitch black. And that's what the road is like now. And I'd give anything to be at the kitty dip party 2 blocks from my house with the Einstein brains blaring on the sound system so I can't hear the guy talking about how he prepares petri dishes for his research, or the woman who's describing an airline ticket fiasco that wouldn't even be interesting if it had happened to me. But I guess that's life. A continuum between darkness and mala folla, a Spanish phrase that describes an indifference so profound it can't be bothered with scorn. But I remember one of the best parties ever was put together by an Australian father and son. And by the end of the, everyone was dancing to Tutti Frutti and screaming, drunk and in love with the world. And I danced with a roly-poly lawyer named Booter, who I never saw again. And the hangover the next day was a small price to pay for that crazy mix of Little Richard and Cabernet. And there was food, yeah, but who remembers what? Thanks so much.
Barbara, thank you again. Absolutely.
Can I give a shout out to Mary Shanahan, who is, I see her cat, but I don't see her, but she lives in my first house. So, oh, there she is. Okay. Hi, Mary.
Mary, we're so glad you're with us. We're glad that you've all joined us this evening. We're going to just close with a moment of prayer, and this prayer comes to us from the prayer book from New Zealand. I hope you enjoy this prayer for night. Lord, it is night. The night is for stillness. Let us be still in the presence of God. It is night after a long day. What has been done has been done. What has not been done has not been done. Let it be. The night is dark. Let our fears of the darkness of the world and of our own lives rest in you. The night is quiet. Let the quietness of your peace enfold us, all dear to us, and all who have no peace. The night heralds the dawn. Let us look expectantly to a new day, new joys, new possibilities, parties. In your name we pray. Amen. Barbara, thank you again. We're so, so grateful for your gifts and for you sharing your gifts with us this evening. And I hope you all have a wonderful, peaceful night. Take care, friends.
Thank you. Bye-bye.